Chapter 4. When I reached the age of 13, my father pronounced the benediction. I thank thee, O Lord, that thou hast rid me of this responsibility. For according to the Jewish law, I reached, with the beginning of my 14th year, the status of manhood, and was responsible for my deeds in the eyes of heaven. My father sent me to Lud, where there were many synagogues. In one of them I became the pupil of a local rabbi, and from him learned the written law, the codes, and the histories, which are part of the higher education of every Jew. I lived with the family of my father's brother, who was a saddle maker, and from him I learned this trade. For although my father was well-to-do, and although he had destined me for a career of learning, it was proper that I learn a handicraft, according to the saying, "He that does not teach his son a trade brings him up to be a highway robber." I will not dwell on the years I spent in the pleasant city of Lud, where I made many friends. I will only say that my inclination was always to my studies, and that I learned much, both of the written law and of the oral tradition, which has come down to us from generation to generation. When I reached my 16th year, I returned home, and my father asked me again, "Is it your desire, my son, to consecrate yourself utterly to the Torah?" "With all my heart and with all my soul," I answered. "If this be so, you shall accompany me on the next festival pilgrimage to Jerusalem. As you know, I have a friend there whose 2 sons are pupils of the famous Rabbi Nicodemus. I will leave you in their company." And thus the matter fell out. Shortly before the next festival, we went up together, my father, 2 elder brothers of mine, and myself. There went with us a small flock of sheep to be sold, and 2 donkeys. On one of them my father rode when he was tired. On the other he had loaded 2 jars of wine and a cruse of honey, a gift for his friend in Jerusalem, likewise our own provisions for the journey, dried cheeses, fruits, and bread. When we passed through Lud, we were joined by a whole caravan of pilgrims. At Jabna we were so numerous that we filled the whole marketplace. Thence we began to mount the hills of Judea toward Jerusalem, and the road echoed with the piping of our flutes. This was not my first pilgrimage to Jerusalem, but it has remained more clearly in my mind than all the others. I can still hear the tinkling of the bells which hung from the ears of the camels and donkeys, and I can see the long procession of happy pilgrims winding up and down along the roads. I knew that this time I was going up to Jerusalem to remain there, and that henceforth my life would be irrevocably dedicated to the Torah. I was eager to set eyes on my new rabbi, and I was filled with curiosity concerning my new life. I remember clearly the night time of that pilgrimage, when our group rested in a village, all of us gathered about a well. The men would not enter any houses in the village, since it was more fitting to pass the night of such a journey under the open sky. I, accounting myself a man, followed their example, and entered neither a house nor yet the tents of the women, but sat with the men about a fire which they built up near the well. The night was chilly here on the heights, and the older folk wrapped themselves in mantles of sheepskin and lay down. We, the younger folk, stood about them in a respectful circle and served them. But no one slept between nightfall and morning. It was the early part of the month, and a thin, pure crescent of a moon followed the sun into the blue depths of the western heavens. The stars sprang out, thick and brilliant. The old folk told stories of the great rebellion under the leadership of Judah the Galilean, in which some of them had taken an active part. They remembered how they had stolen away from their homes, their swords concealed under their mantles, to join the rebels. Fisher folk went with them from the haven of Joppa. Hope ran high in those days. The rebels believed that salvation was at hand, that our people was about to be freed from the yoke of Edom. But the hope turned out to be a deception, and the sword of God was shattered by the heathen. "God's sword is not shattered, for God's sword is his Torah," said a learned man of Kfar Saba. "Not the sword of the Torah is our need today, but a sword of steel," called out one who stood in the shadows. "The sword of the Torah must be sheathed a while, till the sword of steel has conquered." Heads were turned toward the last speaker. Who was it that dared to utter such words? Someone lifted up a blazing brand, and by its light we beheld a mighty figure of a man, with wild locks of hair and eyes that flashed back from the darkness. Bar Abba, a murmur went up. Bar Abba is among us. Does God need iron or chariots to help him? Has he not at his command the hosts which fill the heavens? Let the time only come when he will send his anointed one. But why does he wait so long? It is written, though he delay, yet we must await him daily. Who knows but that we shall encounter him in Jerusalem when we arrive there? Nay, Messiah will not come down from heaven until we have forged him ourselves on the white-hot anvil, and until we have beaten out our swords thereon. God does not desire a rabble of slaves as his people. God desires sons of freedom, called out one in support of Bar Abba. A spirit of uneasiness, of terror descended on the assembly. I behold even now the figure of Bar Abba, standing out now in the light of the campfire. He was a fisherman who worked in the harbor of Joppa, gigantic of stature, burned by the sun, dark like an Ethiopian, with muscles of steel. The locks of his head and of his beard were tossed in the wind. His teeth flashed out, milk white, from between his lips. He lifted a hand toward the rabbi who had rebuked him and said, "The bitter gall of oppression is over full in our bosoms. I say to you that if one could be found today in the mold of Judah the Zealot to gather the hosts about him, we would drive Edom and his hired fighters before us as the storm drives a ship." Bar Abba, Bar Abba, those are the words of a sinner. Do you not see to what a pass we have come? Without God nothing can be accomplished. Such is the will of God, and we dare not question him until he sends his Messiah to gather us up. Another spoke. They say in that wilderness of Judea there is a man who calls the people to him to prepare by baptism for the coming of the Messiah. It is not by baptism of water that we shall prepare for the coming of the Messiah. Woe to the ears which have heard such words. May your lips be stopped up, Bar Abba. Men who follow you only delay the redemption. It is God's will that we shall make our necks a footstool for our enemies, and we shall obey him in love and be silent. We shall not question his decision, the rabbi cried. I saw the white beard of the old man tremble, while his eyes turned a bluish red and seemed to protrude from their sockets as if they were about to fall out. "But why?" cried other voices. "Because we are sinners, all of us," the old man replied. "And are the heathen better than we? But he has not made a covenant with the heathen. He has made his covenant with us. That is the bond between Abraham and God, which imposes on us the duty of the Torah. Every one of us, even unborn, was there when the bond was confirmed, and every one of us must take on himself the burden of the Torah. And now, because we have thrown the burden from our shoulders, he punishes us. For he has chosen us to be his holy people, and to be a light to the world, a light to the Gentiles, observing his laws and commandments until he sends his Messiah. And in that day all the nations shall bow themselves before God and accept his Torah. And until then we must carry the yoke and be silent. We must be silent." And the old man put his fingers to his lips. In that night on the hills, I became a man. I was confronted for the first time with the living forces which are in our people.